Let me tell you something that most people get completely wrong about Pakistan's nuclear program. They assume it's a defensive deterrent, a last resort weapon designed to prevent Indian invasion, and on the surface, that logic makes total sense. Why wouldn't a smaller nation surrounded by a larger adversary build nuclear weapons purely for survival? But here's where it gets interesting, and honestly, this idea flipped my entire understanding of how Pakistan's strategic architecture actually works. What if the nuclear arsenal isn't the backup plan? What if it's the foundation underneath everything else? The military posture, the political leverage, the economic strategy, the regional partnerships, all of it resting on a nuclear doctrine that operates in three distinct phases, each designed to accomplish something most analysts never discuss in public. There's a paradox sitting at the center of South Asian security that nobody seems willing to address directly. Pakistan maintains the world's fastest-growing nuclear arsenal, not just growing, accelerating. From roughly 165 warheads in 2020 to an estimated 190 warheads today, with projections reaching 250 to 300 warheads by 2028. That trajectory alone should trigger serious questions. Why does a country with a fraction of India's conventional military capacity, a fraction of its economic output, and a fraction of its geographic size need an expanding nuclear stockpile that will soon rival Britain and France combined? The standard answer is deterrence escalation, matching India's own nuclear expansion. But stay with me here, because the moment you actually start pulling on that thread, you realize the answer is not what most people expect. Pakistan spends approximately 4% of its GDP on defense, roughly $12 billion annually in a $350 billion economy. India spends around $75 billion, more than 6 times Pakistan's budget. Conventional military parity is not just difficult, it's mathematically impossible. Pakistan cannot match India's 4 million active personnel, cannot match its aircraft carrier fleet, cannot match its Su-30 squadrons or its artillery reserves. Every simulation of conventional India-Pakistan conflict since the 1990s ends the same way. Pakistan loses territorial control within 2 to 3 weeks of sustained engagement. So here's the genuine strategic puzzle. If you're Pakistan's military planners and you know conventional defense is unwinnable, what do? You don't just build nuclear weapons as a last resort. You build a nuclear strategy that makes conventional conflict unthinkable from the beginning. And that strategy has 3 phases. To understand why this matters so much, you have to think about what nuclear doctrine actually represents in practice. Most people hear nuclear weapons and imagine apocalyptic exchange, mushroom clouds over cities, civilization-ending catastrophe. That imagery comes from Cold War superpowers with arsenals designed for mutually assured destruction. Thousands of warheads, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine launch systems capable of surviving first strikes and retaliating with nation-ending force. The entire logic was binary, peace or annihilation, with nothing in between. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine doesn't work that way. It operates on a completely different strategic theory called full-spectrum deterrence. Full-spectrum deterrence is the framework we need to understand before anything else makes sense. The concept emerged in Pakistani strategic thinking around 2011, formalized in response to India's cold start doctrine. Here's how it works. Traditional nuclear deterrence creates a threshold. If you cross this line, nuclear weapons get used. The threshold is intentionally high: existential threat to the nation, invasion of core territory, imminent regime collapse. The idea is that keeping the threshold high prevents accidental escalation while maintaining credible deterrent against catastrophic attack. Pakistan looked at that model and identified a fundamental vulnerability. If your adversary knows you'll only use nuclear weapons when facing total defeat, they can design military operations that stay just below that threshold. Limited incursions, shallow territorial grabs, rapid strikes followed by consolidation, operations designed to achieve political objectives without triggering nuclear response. Full-spectrum deterrence eliminates that safe zone. Instead of one high threshold, Pakistan created multiple lower thresholds across the entire spectrum of conflict. Tactical nuclear weapons for battlefield use against advancing Indian armor columns. Short-range ballistic missiles for strikes against military installations inside Indian territory. Medium-range systems for strategic targets deeper inside India. Long-range missiles capable of reaching any location on the subcontinent. The doctrine explicitly refuses to specify when or under what conditions these weapons would be used. The ambiguity is deliberate. India cannot design a limited war because Pakistan has created nuclear options at every level of escalation. escalation. That's the theory. Now let's talk about how this translates into three distinct operational phases that are already reshaping Asian security. Phase 1 is what military analysts call the tactical deterrence layer, and it's built around Pakistan's Nasr missile system. The Nasr is a short-range ballistic missile, roughly 60 kilometers maximum range, designed to carry a nuclear warhead in the low kiloton range, somewhere between 5 and 5 kilotons, smaller than Hiroshima, but substantially larger than any conventional weapon. Pakistan has deployed these systems with forward army units, meaning they're not stored in central facilities waiting for presidential authorization. They're in the field, mobile, under military command. Here's why that matters. Imagine an Indian armored division crossing into Pakistani territory during a crisis. 300 tanks, mechanized infantry, air support, moving to seize a strategically important city within 48 hours. Pakistan's conventional forces cannot stop this advance. They can slow it, inflict casualties, make it costly, but they cannot prevent it. Under traditional deterrence, Pakistan faces a choice: accept territorial loss or escalate to strategic nuclear weapons, which means attacking Indian cities and triggering full nuclear exchange. The Nasr eliminates that impossible choice. Instead, Pakistani commanders have a third option: use a tactical nuclear weapon against the advancing Indian formation on Pakistani soil, not hitting Indian cities, not targeting civilian populations, but destroying the invasion force in a single strike on Pakistan's own territory. The weapon's low yield minimizes fallout. The target is purely military, and the message is unmistakable: stop the advance or face additional tactical nuclear use. This is phase 1. Tactical deterrence that makes conventional invasion suicidal without requiring civilization-ending escalation. India now has to assume that any significant ground offensive into Pakistan will encounter nuclear weapons at the battalion or brigade level, not just at the national survival level. That assumption changes everything about Indian military planning. But here's where it gets more complicated. India's response to Pakistan's tactical nuclear doctrine has been to adopt a strategy they call proactive conventional operations, essentially accepting that any future India-Pakistan war will be short, intense, and operate under nuclear shadow from day one. Indian doctrine now emphasizes rapid mobilization, integrated battle groups that can strike deep into Pakistan within 72 hours, and overwhelming force concentration designed to achieve objectives before Pakistan's nuclear decision-making can respond. The theory is that speed and shock might allow India to accomplish limited territorial objectives before Pakistan's tactical nuclear threshold is crossed. Pakistan's military planners know this. They know India is designing around phase 1, so they built phase 2. Phase 2 is the strategic ambiguity layer, and it centers on Pakistan's expanding missile arsenal and its refusal to adopt a no-first-use policy. India officially maintains no first use, meaning it pledges never to use nuclear weapons unless attacked with nuclear weapons first. Pakistan explicitly rejects that doctrine. Pakistani officials have stated repeatedly that nuclear weapons remain on the table in response to conventional threats, not just nuclear ones. This isn't rhetoric, it's strategic signaling designed to keep Indian planners permanently uncertain about where the actual red lines exist. What constitutes an existential threat? Is it loss of Lahore, loss of Karachi, destruction of a certain percentage of Pakistan's air force, economic blockade? Nobody knows, and Pakistan ensures nobody knows. Supporting this ambiguity is a missile development program that has accelerated dramatically over the last decade. The Shaheen 3 missile, tested in 2015, has a range of 2,650 kilometers, which puts every location in India within reach, including the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in the Bay of Bengal. The Ababil missile, tested in 2017, reportedly carries multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, meaning one missile can strike several different targets. Pakistan is also developing submarine-launched cruise missiles, giving it a second strike capability that survives even if India destroys all land-based systems in a preemptive attack. All of this sends a single message: we can reach you anywhere, we can survive your first strike, and you cannot predict when we'll use these capabilities. Now layer on top of that the question of economic warfare. Pakistan's economy is fragile, perpetually on the edge of balance of payments crises, dependent on International Monetary Fund bailouts, carrying external debt exceeding $120 billion. If India attempted comprehensive economic blockade, closing trade routes, pressuring international lenders, disrupting energy supplies, Pakistan faces economic collapse within months. Does economic collapse constitute an existential threat that triggers nuclear response? Pakistan's doctrine doesn't say. The ambiguity is the deterrent. India cannot pursue economic coercion without considering the possibility that Pakistan interprets strangulation as equivalent to military invasion. Phase 2 forces India to treat even non-military confrontation as potentially nuclear threshold events, but both Phase 1 and Phase 2 still operate within the India-Pakistan bilateral framework. They're designed to deter Indian aggression and prevent Indian conventional superiority from translating into strategic dominance. They work by making war between the two countries unthinkable. That would be sufficient if South Asia existed in isolation. It doesn't. And that brings us to Phase 3, which is where this entire framework begins to reshape regional order in ways that extend far beyond the subcontinent. Phase 3 is the geopolitical leverage layer, and it operates on a completely different logic. Pakistan's nuclear arsenal isn't just a deterrent against India. It's a strategic asset that gives Pakistan influence with external powers who have their own interests in South Asian stability or instability. Think about what happens when a nuclear-armed Pakistan aligns closely with China. Suddenly, China has a military partner on India's western border that India cannot eliminate through conventional force. Every Indian division positioned to defend against Pakistan is a division that cannot deploy to the Himalayas to counter Chinese pressure. Every Pakistani missile system pointed at New Delhi is a complication in India's strategic calculus that benefits Beijing. This isn't theoretical. China has provided substantial assistance to Pakistan's missile and nuclear programs over decades, including design assistance for the Shaheen series and supply of ring magnets used in uranium enrichment. The China-Pakistan Strategic Partnership, formalized through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor Project, a $62 billion infrastructure investment connecting Western China to the Arabian Sea through Pakistani territory, creates a dynamic where Pakistan's nuclear capability serves Chinese strategic interests without China bearing any of the proliferation costs or risks. If India escalates tensions with China in Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, Pakistan can generate pressure on India's western front, forcing New Delhi to fight a two-front scenario it cannot win. Pakistan's nuclear arsenal ensures that any pressure it applies cannot be eliminated through Indian conventional retaliation. This is leverage. Pakistan converts its nuclear program into geopolitical weight that far exceeds what its economy or conventional military would otherwise provide. Now extend that logic to other regional actors. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have provided Pakistan with billions in financial assistance over the years, soft loans, deferred oil payments, deposits in Pakistan's central bank to stabilize reserves. In exchange, Pakistan has deployed troops to Saudi Arabia, provided training to Gulf militaries, and reportedly entered into understandings about nuclear technology transfer should Saudi Arabia face existential threat from Iran. There are persistent reports, never confirmed but never entirely denied, that Saudi Arabia helped finance Pakistan's nuclear program in the 1980s and 1990s, with the implicit understanding that Pakistan would provide nuclear umbrella if Saudi Arabia faced catastrophic threat. Whether those specific arrangements exist or not, the framework is clear. Pakistan's nuclear capability becomes a regional security asset that other powers can access indirectly, giving Pakistan influence and financial support it could never obtain through conventional means. This is where the three-phase strategy starts to compound. Phase 1 deters Indian conventional invasion. Phase 2 prevents Indian economic coercion. Phase 3 converts the entire nuclear program into geopolitical currency that Pakistan spends to secure Chinese investment, Gulf financial support, and Turkish defense cooperation. Each phase reinforces the others. The stronger Pakistan's tactical nuclear deterrent, the more valuable it becomes as a strategic partner to China. The deeper Pakistan's partnership with China, the more resources it has to expand its nuclear arsenal. The larger the arsenal, the more effective the deterrent. And the cycle continues. But all of this operates against a backdrop that makes the entire system increasingly unstable. India is not static. India's economy is now the fifth largest in the world, approaching $4 trillion in GDP. Its defense budget grows annually. It's developing its own ballistic missile defense systems, acquiring S-400 air defense batteries from Russia, building nuclear submarines, and expanding its own nuclear arsenal to maintain what it calls credible minimum deterrence. India's strategic community increasingly argues that Pakistan's full-spectrum deterrence is a bluff, that no Pakistani leader would actually use tactical nuclear weapons and invite massive Indian retaliation. Some Indian strategists advocate calling that bluff through aggressive conventional operations designed to expose Pakistani indecision. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps serious analysts awake. A crisis develops. Another Mumbai-style terrorist attack, a border skirmish that spirals, a political leadership in either country that needs nationalist distraction from domestic problems. India launches limited conventional strikes into Pakistani territory, hitting terrorist training camps or infrastructure it claims supports militant groups. Pakistan faces the choice: absorb the strikes and appear weak, undermining the entire deterrence strategy, or use tactical nuclear weapons and prove the doctrine is real. If Pakistan uses even a single low-yield tactical nuke, India's no-first-use doctrine collapses, and massive retaliation becomes not just possible but expected by Indian domestic audience. At that point, you have two nuclear-armed nations, both governed by narratives of historical grievance, both facing domestic political pressures that punish de-escalation as weakness, locked in a spiral where each step up the ladder seems rational from their perspective, but collectively leads to catastrophe. Now add to this something that makes the entire South Asian nuclear dynamic particularly significant for the broader international system. The United States has spent decades trying to prevent nuclear proliferation, building a global architecture of treaties, export controls, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure designed to stop additional countries from acquiring nuclear weapons. That system is collapsing. Pakistan demonstrated that a country under severe international pressure can build nuclear weapons anyway if it prioritizes the program and finds external sponsors willing to provide assistance. North Korea proved the same thing. Iran is approaching the same threshold. When Pakistan expands its arsenal from 165 warheads to potentially 300 warheads over less than a decade, it sends a message to every other country considering nuclear weapons. The international system cannot stop you, and nuclear weapons provide security and leverage that no other military capability delivers. Pakistan's three-phase nuclear strategy doesn't just reshape South Asian security. It provides a model that other regional powers facing threats from larger neighbors can study and potentially replicate. What Pakistan did in the 1980s and 1990s, another country could do in the 2030s with more advanced technology, more available suppliers, and a more fragmented international system less capable of coordinating pressure. Every time Pakistan successfully uses its nuclear arsenal as geopolitical leverage, extracting IMF bailouts despite economic mismanagement, securing Chinese investment despite governance failures, maintaining strategic relevance despite conventional military inferiority, it demonstrates to other nations that nuclear weapons are not just security instruments, but political and economic tools. The regional implications are already becoming visible. India accelerates its own nuclear modernization, not just matching Pakistan's expansion, but developing capabilities designed to target China as well. China provides Pakistan with submarine technology, knowing that survivable Pakistani second strike capability complicates Indian strategic planning. The United States provides India with civil nuclear technology and defense systems, trying to build India as a counterweight to China, but inadvertently enabling Indian military capabilities that Pakistan must then counter with further nuclear expansion. Russia sells advanced weapons to India while maintaining some defense ties with Pakistan. The result is a multi-layered arms race where nuclear arsenals, missile systems, and delivery platforms expand across the region simultaneously. Project this forward to 2028, and what you see is a fundamentally different strategic landscape in Asia. Pakistan's nuclear arsenal reaches 250 to 300 warheads, fully deployed across tactical, operational, and strategic systems. India's arsenal expands proportionally, perhaps reaching 200 to 250 warheads, with increasingly sophisticated delivery systems. Both countries possess secure second strike capabilities, multiple launch platforms, and doctrines that emphasize first-use options rather than minimum deterrence. The crisis stability that comes from mutual assured destruction between superpowers doesn't apply here. Both countries have nuclear arsenals large enough to inflict catastrophic damage, but not large enough to guarantee total destruction, creating a window where limited nuclear war seems thinkable. At the global level, the entire non-proliferation regime that has governed international security since the 1970s faces accelerating erosion. If nuclear weapon states cannot reduce their arsenals, if regional powers expand their arsenals without consequence, if the International Atomic Energy Agency cannot verify compliance, science, if the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty cannot prevent new weapon states from emerging, then the entire architecture becomes decorative rather than functional. We're not talking about immediate collapse, but rather progressive hollowing out where the institutions remain, but the behavioral constraints they once imposed gradually disappear. The financial dimensions compound the security dynamics. Pakistan's defense spending already consumes resources that could address education, healthcare, or infrastructure development in a country where 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. Expanding the nuclear arsenal from 165 to 300 warheads requires uranium enrichment, plutonium reprocessing, missile production, command and control systems, security infrastructure, and maintenance programs that cost billions in an economy that can barely sustain current spending. Where does that money come from? Either from development budgets, deepening the poverty and governance failures that create domestic instability, or from external sources like China and Gulf states, which increases Pakistan's strategic dependence on those partners and further entangles its nuclear program with broader geopolitical competition. So when you zoom all the way out and look at the complete picture, what you see is not a simple bilateral deterrence relationship between India and Pakistan. What you see is a three-phase nuclear strategy that operates simultaneously as military deterrent, economic necessity, and geopolitical asset. Phase 1 makes conventional war unthinkable through tactical nuclear deployment. Phase 2 makes economic coercion impossible through strategic ambiguity. Phase 3 converts the entire program into leverage with external powers that need Pakistan as a counterweight to India or as a partner in broader regional competition. Each phase reinforces the others. Each phase creates pressures that drive further expansion, and each phase contributes to systemic instability that extends far beyond South Asia. The real question is not whether Pakistan's nuclear strategy will reshape Asia by 2028. It's already reshaping Asia right now. The question is whether the international system has any mechanism to manage that transformation before it generates a crisis that tests whether all these carefully constructed deterrence theories actually work under pressure. Because deterrence is ultimately a psychological game. It works only as long as all players believe it works. The moment someone miscalculates, misreads signals, or decides that their domestic political survival requires taking risks that rational strategic analysis would reject, the entire structure can collapse very quickly. And right now, the conditions that make that kind of miscalculation more likely are assembling faster than the mechanisms that would prevent it.